Okay, as our panelists get settled in, I want to take a chance to introduce each of them here today. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. So first we have Dr. Vonderlack-Navarro, who we've already met. Next we have Miss Alicia Levi. Miss Alicia Levi serves as the Vice President of PBS Education and oversees PBS effort in developing education services for PBS, local public television stations, students, and teachers. She's responsible for PBS's digital platforms and media production, strategic partnerships, professional development, and other emerging products and support for the pre-K to 16 education market. Next, we have Dr. Raul Isasi. Dr. Raul Isasi's grandparents were among the first Mexican immigrants to come to West Michigan and work as migrant workers. His father learned to read and write despite only completing a formal education through the 4th grade. Raul attended Grand Valley State University as a first-generation college student and earned his bachelor's degree in Spanish and elementary education. Raul has worked as a teacher, counselor, and school administrator in GRPS. He currently teaches at the School of Education at GVSU and works with the Latino Student Initiative. Next, we have Miss Barb Berry. Miss Barb Berry is a local teacher who served the English learners of Kent City Community Schools as a teacher, translator, and migrant recruiter. She also serves as a reading interventionist during the summer migrant program and teaches in the after-school Vista program. Ms. Berry earned her bachelor's and master's degree from Grand Valley State University with certification in teaching English as a second language K through 12 and secondary English language arts and secondary Spanish. Next, Dr. John Walcott. He began his career as a middle school teacher in Grand Rapids before moving to the Dominican Republic, where he served as a missionary for 5 years. After returning to Michigan, Dr. Walcott became the founding principal of the Potter House High School in Grand Rapids. He has served as a professor in Calvin College's education department since 2012. He earned his Ph.D. in curriculum instruction and teacher education at Michigan State University, where he was awarded the University Distinguished Fellowship. And last but certainly not least, Miss Wendy Miller. Ms. Miller is currently in her 6th year at Grand Valley State University's Charter School office. She is a reading supervisor for more than 68 schools, supporting them in all aspects of literacy. Ms. Miller spent 9 years in kindergarten and 1st grade classrooms and 4 years as a K-12 reading intervention specialist. She received her teaching degree at the University of Iowa with an emphasis in reading. She obtained her master's degree with a specialist endorsement in reading through GVSU. Can we take a moment to welcome our panelists? So we're really excited to have each of you here, and I want to give you an opportunity to give some quick remarks, starting with Wendy, and we'll move this way down, about your thoughts of the presentation and thoughts of moving forward in Grand Rapids.
First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to come. I absolutely loved listening to you. I get the wonderful opportunity of traveling all across the state of Michigan. I actually work with about 78 schools, and I definitely see the deficit in language. I see the deficit in language across every student that's in the classroom, not only just Hispanic, Arabic, across the whole board I see a deficiency, and I think it's really across the state of Michigan hurting our literacy and in getting these students and closing the achievement gap with literacy. So thank you for having me here. I think language is a huge part of why many of our kids in the state of Michigan, all of them are not reading proficient. They're not coming in with the background knowledge and the vocabulary across the board to be successful with comprehension. And I do think it's something that we definitely need to focus in on.
Yeah, I will echo that as well. It was a privilege to listen to your remarks. And yeah, we're speaking the same language here. So it's great to be here tonight with all of you. I think in particular, we know the importance of literacy. We know that in terms of academics, it's probably the primary reason why students drop out of school is because of literacy difficulties. And we know there are things that we can do to help those students. I come at this from the place of a teacher educator, preparing those teachers to go out there. And of course, there's huge implications for that. you started talking about demographics, and that's something we talk about all the time in teacher education, is this demographic divide, that unfortunately the demographics are changing, which is great in our country, but the demographics of our teachers, not so much.
Yeah.
And so dealing with those issues of linguistic and cultural competence is right at the heart of what we need to do as we're preparing teachers. And of course, it's something that we all need to grow in. So that was fantastic to hear those comments. I think also as we look at how, the important role of language in dealing with not only academic development, but also with identity came out really strongly.
Yeah.
Your comment about, that poem, the lived experience. When we don't allow students to share their lived experience, we're also giving them the message that school isn't really for them. And so it's just so important to have these literacy approaches that welcome and affirm cultural, linguistic difference. And for parents as well, to be able to, we know as teachers we need to combat that deficit model with our students. But sometimes we forget about that with parents. We look at parents with a deficit model as well, saying, well, yeah, we love these kids, but if only their parents would. And you've kind of shown how we can say, hey, there's a lot of strength in parents. They can help their students with their language proficiency. And there's just so many ways we can make use of parents in this project as well. So again, thank you.
I was ready to be the amen corner a lot of the time. Amen, a bunch of times, but I held back. But I really appreciate the value of the home language. The cognates that was only a very small list in one content area of all the content that could be understood better if children were able to include their native language, because they can understand that if you connect that cognate for them. If teachers can value their home language and encourage the use and growth in both, and the inclusion of parents. And in our district, I'm from Kent City, one of the things that we are working on as a district right now is how we can get more parents involved and invite more parents in. We're doing that with making sure that our communications are translated into Spanish, because we have about 18% right now of second language students, that we are making sure that we can give the parents the understanding of what they need to do. One of the first parents I spoke with when I started in our district 9 years ago said, just because I can't understand the English doesn't mean I can't help make sure the homework gets done. And that has stuck with me, that our parents are willing, if we can give them the tools, if we can include them in the equation. And the research shows that including parents and making that connection between home and school can make a major difference for our students.
So many things were going through my head because I started working in Grand Rapids as a bilingual teacher in 1977. And all of your stories, I've been there, at the pull-out program, the discussions about why, we were teaching Spanish, why weren't we just teaching English, lots of things about my own family, my dad not being literate, yet he believed in education, so there was books all over my house. And I spent 10 years at Hall Elementary School, which is now Cesar Chavez. I remember working with the parent community. I used to see the library going up on Madison Street, and I said, you know what, we need a library on Hall Street, because we were talking, our school improvement team had this goal, to increase literacy. And we said, well, if you want kids to read, they've got to be given opportunities to read if they want to increase their reading. Same thing with writing. If we want them to become writers, we have to let them write. And so we had this goal, and through collaboration with the community and partners, we were able to secure a library and a house that somebody donated, and that now is Cook Library. And we were fortunate to have that, but that was because we believed there was a passion that our parents wanted to be literate, but they didn't have books and they didn't have the resources. So together we came and we did that. Now in my work with undergraduate teacher candidates, I hear the stories. My candidates are mostly middle class, non-minority students, and they'll say, I'm in a school, everybody speaks a different language, they speak Spanish. When I started working in Grand Rapids Public Schools, we had 2 language groups. Spanish and Vietnamese. Now we know there's probably more than 80 languages represented in the district. And they come back and they'll say, I don't know what to do. And so, yes, your policies, your recommendations and changes for teachers, we're all teachers of language.
I have my own mic. Look at that, they gave me my own.
Wow.
You know, I'm with the media, so I have. I bring my own camera crew too, following me around all day. I just wanted to start by just complimenting the group here. I think it's remarkable to see this kind of a turnout on the second week of school. I think it demonstrates such a strong commitment, right, to, and again, I'll speak in media terms right now, the audience that you serve, right? Your audience is students, it's children and their families, and a shared commitment to learning. I was amazed. I thought your presentation was really remarkable, and I was also kind of excited because PBS, for those of you that aren't aware, we're really committed to home to school and school to home, right? We start with early learners. We believe that literacy is key to success in school and in life, and all the stats prove it out. We've really recognized this deficiency, and deficiency is the wrong term, but the gap in language, and we just have rolled out a series of resources for the audience that we serve in classrooms, which are educators, a series of resources that have charts very much like yours, right? That focus on modules of learning, very distinct areas of learning, where we're really looking to integrate both the language and the content in a compelling way. We believe in focusing on the whole child. And we also believe that media is a great kind of common denominator. We know that media engages children. We know that it's an opportunity to engage parents as well. So our focus has always been on the power of media to help educate and inspire, and we're really excited. I'm excited to see that some of the work we've been doing models some of the research and work that's been addressed here. So we're thrilled to be here and really impressed with what you had to say today. Now I'll give you my mic.
Am I supposed to respond to my own talk? No, right? It was great.
Great job.
Yeah. So I can hope you see why we had brought so many great leaders in the community, representing many different aspects of which ways that we work with the students, and that we are able to have a discussion today about how do we move forward as a city, and how do we move forward in scaffolding the students' language and culture on their academic progress moving forward. And so at this time, I would really like to open it up to the audience to ask questions to our wonderful panelists about how do we continue to move forward in our classrooms and in our everyday lives, making sure that our students' culture and language are being built upon in every way, shape, and form.
I'm a bilingual educator for GRPS, and I teach third grade. We have an early exit. We have an early exit transitional program, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Our kids are transitioning out of English by the middle of second grade. So third grade, when I get them, is their first year all English. Of course, we still use Spanish with some of my students, but are we? And, there's always this fight, like, are we giving them enough time to really get solid in their home language? Because it's not all very supported at home. Their home literacy is not, because a lot of their parents are not very literate in their language. They are orally, yes, they can communicate with their parents, but are we building by literate students or just bilingual students?
If it's an early exit by second grade, I would say neither. Right? The point of early exit is not to build the home language, it's supporting it enough to get to English. So what the research shows is most beneficial is more additive models or developmental models that usually are longer, right? The Cadillac model is the dual language, right? But second grade is super young. And generally what you see in time with kids that are building both languages at once, when you compare them to non-native or native speakers of English, that their reading at third grade could be a little bit behind or close. It's over time that you see that they do better So when you build that home language over longer periods of time, again, that academic language takes 5 to 7 years. So if they're being pushed out before then, they don't have that deeper academic language. And so usually you see that maybe there's some oral competency that's maintained because of their talking with their parents, but that deep literacy can struggle.
Lots of times, I know I worked in many schools where teachers were saying the student doesn't need language services because they have that social conversational language. And that can be deceiving because they hear the students talking on the playground.
Yeah.
You see them interacting with their peers. They can manage their school and navigate, but they really don't have the academic language yet. So, you know, the research does say it's 5 to 7 years to have that academic language developed. And it really does take that long. Some students, I've seen them do very well. But there's others that you can tell that they begin to struggle because the gaps begin to show up.
A small technical difficulty, but.
So my name is Jessica Cruz, and most of what you said really speaks to me because when I came here before we I didn't speak any English. And I know recently, like, you have the Southwest Community Campus.
Thank you. Very proud of Kaylee, by the way, Center for Latinos Director, co-founder right there, fantastic.
Yay, Kaylee.
So I was very intrigued by everything that you said because I came here, I didn't speak any English, went through GRPS. Mr. Raul Isasi, who I respectfully still call that, was my elementary school principal back when Cesar Chavez was still called HAW. And now I'm very, very, very invested in bilingual education. It's something that I've studied as a graduate student myself in the past. And I'm curious in your thoughts about developmental bilingual education beyond elementary school. I know that that's where most of the focus is. We do have the Southwest Community Campus here, which is a dual language or developmental bilingual education program, 90-10. And I know there's talks about converting that into a high school. When I was in New York, I had the pleasure of visiting Gregorio Luperón High School, which is for recent immigrants, 90-10 model there. Extremely successful. Most of the students there outperform their monolingual peers in standardized test scores. So I would like to know your ideas and your thoughts about developmental bilingual education at the high school level and just kind of imagining what bilingual in the sense of literacy, proficiency, fluency across all content areas might look like and the implications for our labor market. No pressure.
Is that me? Do other folks want to talk? I know a lot less about high school. I mean, I just know that that's fabulous, right? I think it's something that I would promote. That's why I was talking about the seal of biliteracy. I think it's ways to legitimate those kind of programs, and I think they're really important. I think can I bring up the elephant in the room? I mean, the elephant in the room is that we have a very strong accountability system with a monolingual English bias, right? I mean, that kind of speaks to this issue of early exit and getting these kids to English quick, because we got to get those reading scores up, right? It's not understanding how the reading trajectory for these students is going to look different. Like I said, if you're building that home language and kids are building 2 languages at once, right, or emerging bilinguals, they might at 3rd grade look a little behind or at level. It's over time that we see those benefits. But I think that's kind of what more the issue is, right? And that's why we're seeing the dominant model of transitional bilingual. And we are seeing a growth, I would say, in dual language, though that's really exciting. And I think part of that, why it's exciting, is that you're getting buy-in from English dominant folks who are realizing now that this is a beautiful thing to speak more than one language. And so you're broadening the potential advocacy, right? Because you're getting a different set of families along with English learners together pushing for bilingualism and biliteracy. And I think that's where we can have a lot of success.
I think one of the things that we're missing here in the United States is something that's happening in other countries. I was in Kazakhstan a couple years ago, and their students take classes in Kazakh, their home language, in Russian, their language of instruction, and in English, their international language. I think the United States as a whole is missing the boat in not equipping our kids to be global citizens. And I went as part of Teachers for Global Classrooms, and that's something that we need to broaden our aspect, because our students are going to be global citizens. So if we can empower them to use the two languages that they're acquiring at the same time and add and use them in the world, we're going to make a better citizenry for our future.
You know what you're seeing too, I had an opportunity to work at the alternative ed level, and we had a newcomers program at Adelante High School, which also included credit recovery students. But we were seeing a growing number of students coming in that had interrupted education, maybe 2 years of formal schooling, yet the student came in, he's a ninth grader, he has to take English, he has to take algebra, he has to take biology, and he's expected to follow the high school curriculum. And so yes, bilingual and developmental bilingual education programs and strong programs to support students during the school day, but we also had a computer lab, and we told students that you can come in the morning, you need to come in the afternoon, you need to come at night. You can work on this at home because we have technology, but because there were so many gaps, the regular school day wasn't enough to meet the needs of those students. And I think in education, we still think, oh, we have to do this between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. You know, it can't be done. You know, we have to get more creative and say, you know, let's think about how we can serve this population.
Take it a little broader, given what's currently happening in Michigan, and that is the feeling that third grade is an incredibly important time to have kids reading, that we are failing in that as a state. I'd like your opinions on why do you believe that's happening when we know more about child development than we've ever known. We put more money into education than we've ever done. We know the science of education, and now we have a legislating body that's looking at, if you're not there by third grade, we're going to retain you, which goes against everything, at least in theory, that retention is one of the worst possible things to do. So just like your thoughts on those two things.
I'll just start by saying, advocacy, of course, is crucial. And, this group here today, this is part of that boots on the ground. We need to get going. We need to make our voice heard. It's pretty easy to complain about what the legislature does, and I agree completely. It's much harder for us to get our voice heard, and there's no easy recommendations for that, but I think we all need to commit to that to make sure that we are getting our voice heard, that from all levels, teachers at the universities and colleges, and it's just one first step, but we do need to speak a little louder about this, I think, in representing what we do know about education and literacy.
I think there's two key issues. I think number one, we don't allow teachers to get good at their profession. I feel like ours is a profession without practice. We pull something in for a teacher, we do it for a year, then the next thing comes along, we pull it out again. These poor teachers, they start to get good at something, they start to see results, and then someone comes along and says, nope, I'm sorry, we're now gonna change it to this way. And the teachers are not allowed to get good at their profession because you would never do that to a doctor. You wouldn't do that to a doctor. They're allowed to do their profession, they find what works, they see the results, and they stay with it. Teachers are not allowed to do that, and our teachers are just getting frustrated because they cannot do what works in the classroom. That is number one. Number two, I think RTI did us a disservice. And I say it for this reason. Back in 2005 is when it kind of came on board full force around here. That's when I became a reading specialist. What happened with Tier with RTI was the main emphasis was on tier 2 and tier 3. These interventions are going to come in, they're going to make it work. A reading specialist is going to come in and pull the child. And you touched on that a little bit because you talked about EL teachers. I don't see a meld between the EL teachers and a classroom teacher. I'll see the EL teacher doing this and working with them on reading strategies, but then I go in the classroom and it's not the teacher's fault. That's not what I'm saying. We're just not giving them the time to meld the two together. So I think RTI came in. I think we forgot about tier 1. We forgot about supporting our teachers and making sure they had the resources they needed. So sorry, a little passionate about that.
You know, we have to look at teacher expectations, and they have to be high for all students. I was at Hall Elementary School for 10 years, and I did work with some staff. They enjoyed the families, but they said, you know, after you establish relationships with individuals, they'll just tell you they'll share their thoughts. And some of the staff said, you know, really, these students aren't going to make it through high school. Some of them aren't going to make it to college. And I said, really? How can you say that? Because I was one of those students. Spanish was my first language. I had to learn English. And with some of our students, it didn't happen. Some of them did get retained. Some of them did drop out of school. But for some students, they don't follow that typical path that most students follow. I've run into many graduates from Hall Elementary School that went on and earned bachelor degrees, master degrees. Jessica has her doctorate. You know, she was a Hall School graduate. And, you know, at the time, it does seem very difficult, but we spent a lot of time in Grand Rapids talking about how kids, you can become smarter. You know, we had the efficacy-based model, and you learn new strategies, but you can't do it by yourself. You need the support. And there were a lot of supports, again. You know, there was community support. We had a homework house program. We worked with families. But I share your frustration because we still are seeing some students that are not making the grade when it comes to reading. But I have seen that some students don't decide right away, or maybe they haven't quite figured school out. And you see that later on. They go through middle school and then high school, they thrive. Or I've seen them after high school, they take some time off and it's like, wow, you know, I really want to get my education. They didn't always value their education. And so again, this is where the home is very, very important, because parents have to work with us and support us. Because we talk to our students, you guys are doing all the work and you're very tired, but I said students also have a responsibility here and they have to do their part and be responsible for their learning as well. We're using a lot of assessments now, and that has helped a lot, you know, just giving kids feedback on what they need to do, you know, how to close their learning gaps and really talk about what are their learning goals. You know, so some of those discussions have helped a little bit, but I know there are still some students that are not making the grade when it comes to reading.
Okay, I have a question about, I'm at Godwin Heights, and you know, to graduate, you have to have 2 years foreign language. Okay, and then like a small school like Godwin, we just offer one language, Spanish. But then you get like kids who move here like as refugees in like 9th or 10th grade, and we like have to have them take a foreign language, Spanish, even though they speak a foreign language, like Burmese or, you know, Vietnamese or something like that. And then in order to graduate, and then they can't graduate because of the foreign language requirement. And I'm wondering, yay, Michigan. So what I'm wondering is like, especially those of you who teach at the high school level, like, is there policy that's coming up, or can we start this dialogue on like, you know, how we advocate for those kids, or what are you seeing with the guidance counselors that's allowing for like, oh, I don't know, 14 years of life experience in another country to apply for that foreign language requirement, like in their first language? So that's my discussion.
Okay. So the answer to that is, for the state, yes, it's taking time. But that discussion started a few years ago about for our, and I have mainly Spanish speakers for my students, and is it fair to them, you know, to have to take those classes if they've already got it? But I also had Burmese students, and so the process has started. but it has been exceedingly slow because you need the people to develop the accurate tests to be able to give them credit for what they already know, but it is in process.
Wow.
So I was
That's incorrect. The current law is if you took 1 year of schooling in another country, you are waiving the world language requirement. That is the current law. You didn't hear that? The current law stands. If you were in another country and you were in school for 1 year there, even if you were a kindergartner, you would interrupt the schooling, your world language requirement for graduation is waived. You do not have to take world language. That's been in effect when they put it in originally. So we have a lot of kids in Wyoming who have a really strong background, and they take even more Spanish because maybe they got that interrupted and they haven't even got their home language. But if the school wanted to, if the child can, they don't get, they just waive that and they can take other courses, which is allowed them if they want to take more English or whatever they want to do around it. But that is not a requirement that you, if you were, if I come from Mexico and I'm fluent in Spanish, and say, you got to take another language, you don't have to. I come from Africa, you can waive your students. That is allowable currently in the law. It has been since it started.
And you're at Wyoming?
Yeah. I'm a superintendent.
He's a superintendent, is that what he said?
I was the curriculum director ahead of time when we went through all of this group. So
He knows.
now your own board can add additional requirements to the state. Remember, the state says this is what we expect, but your board adopted these. So they said, we said every child, no matter what, they have the right to do that. But if you look up the state law for world language, you look at the curriculum guides, it will note that.
I really don't have a question, but I live in a rural area about 40 minutes from here, and where I am living, basically the Amish have taken over all of our farms. The comment I have is that within the Amish community, which I have worked with them, their children do not learn English until they are over 8 years old. They are only speaking in their German dialect until they're 8 years old, then they learn English. Parents talk both because they sell to us all the time, they make stuff for us all the time. But that is how they run their schools and their community, which I think goes back to what you're saying, learn their first language correctly, then go to the English. Am I right or wrong?
I mean, I think that's been the dominant approach, right, is kind of a sequential learning of language. You hone in on that first language first and then move in. I think, and in that situation, it makes sense. I think for a lot of our kids, though, we need to remember they're growing up simultaneous in their bilingualism, right? A lot of them are growing up, they're hearing English. They're born and raised here. So they're emerging bilinguals, which is a little different. We just talked with a school today where they've started changing their model from 90% Spanish, 10% English to an 80-20. And they're focused, and a lot of what she was saying is, because they've already got some of those resources in English because they're growing up as simultaneous bilinguals. So they've shifted their curriculum to respond to that demographic, which is, I think it's a great question. And it's something in early childhood we're thinking a lot about. And it's a discussion I'm actually having a lot, I work a lot with pre-service folks, is how we can change even our training around the bilingual ESL endorsement so it's more sensitive to kids that don't have a language yet, right? You know what I mean by not having a language? Like they're still developing it. They're the little ones. And what that means for training around emergent bilinguals versus this sequential paradigm that I think has been dominant, right? Do other folks have thoughts on that?
We had this conversation, and I know somebody said, well, how come foreign exchange students do so well? They have developed language in their own.
Yeah.
They know their language, so when they come over, the transfer is much easier. But lots of times when we talk about language, I know in my particular case, my dad had more of an oral language, but he spoke Tex-Mex or Pachuco, so he had a lot of slang Spanish, and he didn't speak proper Spanish. Yet my mom grew up near the border in Laredo, Texas, so she had more standard Spanish. And everybody's language skills are different. And I think sometimes there's an assumption that when you're talking about Spanish speakers that, well, you're all fluent in Spanish. And, you know, in my particular case, I have two younger sisters. My dad was learning English as I was growing up. They understand Spanish, but they cannot speak a word of Spanish, or they don't want to. I keep telling them, how can that happen? We lived in the same house, yet, you know, you don't have the same language skills that I have.
It's common. Yeah.
You know, you have to just remember that different communities have different levels of Spanish or language development.
So we have time for one more question tonight. So who's going to leave the last big question in the room?
No pressure.
Oh, hello. I am also, like Jessica, came from the Dominican Republic, Spanish native speaker, and I would love to see Spanish taught in the schools for native speakers, because I believe that that will help fill out the gaps. I had to take Spanish also, and it was very boring. So I think Spanish for native speakers classes will be very beneficial for students. I don't see that anywhere, so what do you think?
Sounds good to me.
I would agree, and I know that resources, of course, are often tight, but I do some work with a couple schools that have students coming out of the immersion model, and these are not two-way immersion schools, these are one-way immersion schools, where now their students are getting into high school, and they recognize that putting them into the regular Spanish class, even if it's Spanish 3 or Spanish 4, is not what they need. They need something different, and I think the same thing applies here. Spanish for native speakers would be a great benefit to make that available in our community.
And I would just add to that, there are implications to that, right? There's also the development of curriculum and instructional materials that are designed for native speakers, and I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Educational publishers, I don't think, always focus on that. There's a difference in the design of content when you're designing it for a native speaker that's other than English, so it's something that we should stay focused on as well.
Grand Rapids Public Schools did have the bilingual program that taught ESL, and it was remedial, but we also offered Spanish as a second language for any students that wanted to learn Spanish, and also Spanish as a vernacular for the students that currently spoke Spanish to maintain their language skills. And it was a big disappointment throughout the community when that program ended, but it was offered at one time.
Okay, she really wants to ask a question. I think we should let her. It looks like a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want you to think that this is all just about Spanish, because I came as a Dutch immigrant.
Yeah.
When I was 4, I came to kindergarten and didn't speak a word, and there were no special teachers. And I'm one of 8 children. My parents both had just an 8th grade education, but all 8 children graduated from college and graduate degrees, not all, but. So I think back and think, what made that happen? My dad worked in the blueberry patches and everything, but you know what? And this is what I say to my parents. My parents always valued talking to us. They read to us.
Yep.
It wasn't about all the fancy things we did. So I wanted to bring that in. It's not just Spanish. I teach kindergarten. Almost all my classes are our native language, Spanish. So. Then my second thing that I wanted to say is, after visiting many schools in England, in Germany, in the Netherlands, I visit a kindergarten classroom. It is all play. And I say, you know, when I teach kindergarten, they have to read.
Yeah.
And they think that is so crazy. And I don't want to lower the bars for my kids, and I've argued with administration about this. My kids have to play. We had to take away blocks and house. And if you watch and listen to kids, that's when the language happens.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I mean, what are they going to do? I don't think they're going to,
Yeah, because literacy is more than just decoding or sounding out words, right? It's the knowledge you bring to the text.
Not going to fire me. And believe me, my kids know their letters. Not my own kids, but my kindergartners know their letters. But, you know, it's in a context of language, because your line, and I've read so much about this, oral language is the key.
Yep.
And so I do, and I was thinking of the word punch because we were punching cards. And then we said to the kids, oh, I showed them there are 3 kinds of punch. This kind of punch, but we don't do that at Burton School. And I'll punch in the card. And sometimes when I go to a party, I drink punch. And so there's a word in kindergarten. So that play with language, I use a lot of puppets. And sometimes our puppets speak Spanish. And then you should see kids talk. So that's one thing. I like to play in the classroom. And the third thing is parent education. Parents, they think they have to get workbooks. They think they need computers. And I say, you know what? Just talk to your kids. Pull the coins out of your pocket. What do I have in my pocket? Count the socks from the wash. You don't have to be really smart. You just have to talk. I have parents sometimes picking up their kids. They're looking on their phone. And once I build a relationship with parents, I talk about how important it is to hold their hand, ask, how was your day? So we have language, right? It doesn't matter if the language is in Spanish. My language was Dutch at home. Spanish, and talk to your children. So I think our goal is we need parent education. You know, just talk to them about what's important and how we build literacy in the home. Talking about cereal boxes, words, letters, and allowing play in the early grades.
Totally agree.
I just so believe in that. And it's not like I'm lazy and I'm not doing my job. They're learning, but they've got to play. So, okay, that's my thing. I have to say that.
As someone who's been in this community forever, and I am a first generation who went to school in my family. So when you grow up in Wyoming or you grow up in the Grand Rapids area when it was such a manufacturing industry, everybody on my street, they worked at, you know, Ford, Steelcase, GM, whatever it was. And my dad said, you know, so when I hear these stories, even though I wasn't bilingual, it was very similar to my story. But I want you to know that the things I've seen in West Michigan from growing up are a lot of biases. It was sometimes around religion, because everybody kind of looked like me, so we found something else, which was religion. It seemed like I was a kid. Made a big difference whether you were Protestant or Catholic, or you were Baptist, or Jehovah's Witness, or what you were. That was the big thing. And then all of a sudden, we started to change when people started to look different than I did, and then it started to be this ethnicity thing. And now we look about the language, and my concern is this. When I was in school, it was like, okay, you're gonna be on the college track and you're gonna take 2 years of language. And you were considered really bright if you could learn another language. And now all these other people come and they have another language and we're like, well, that slows them down, instead of embracing that and saying, man, these kids are already ahead of where my children are because they already had this language. And the way we treat that, if someone came in here and they could speak 6 languages, we'd say, holy cow, these kids already, in some cases, already have a leg up that they've got a language, and now we're going to have English added to it. That's terrific. That's not a negative. So when a parent calls me and says, why did you put that sign out by your school in Spanish? This is American, we speak English. That's a hard thing to hear as a superintendent, and I have to say, well, then maybe you shouldn't live in Wyoming, okay? But that's what I want to say, and I don't, but we have to embrace and help these children. This is what the profession we all went in when we said yes. When we went to school, we took that certificate, it said in all cases. We didn't say only if this or this, it's all of them. And we can do it. We just have to embrace it as a whole community. And around that, not only will they be bilingual, but they'll be literate, and we can do this. And we owe that to every one of them. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a really great note to end this on. Can we get another round of applause for our fantastic panelists here? Thank you to all of you for your questions, and I think that we've really started to invoke some charge for action within ourselves here today in these discussions and different steps that we need to take forward and act together as a community in collaborative work in order to make sure that our students These children are getting the most out of their education and most out of their experience here in our community, and making sure that we're able to focus on the strengths that the parents bring, not only to just this community, but also to their child's education and to the strengths that they can bring into our classrooms as well. So I really thank you for coming out here tonight, for having this conversation with us, and I really want to take away a lot of the questions that you've asked today and move forward with the CLI mission and what we're going to do in this next year.